You're watching Infosec Bytes, a crash course in information security for journalists. We're based at the Centre for Investigative Journalism in London and supported by the Logan Foundation. This video shows you how to download and install Tails, a secure operating system. This video is provided for information only. It cannot replace the advice of a trained security professional. If lives or safety depend on your security, please seek the advice of an expert. The Centre for Investigative Journalism is a pioneer in providing expert information security training services to journalists and journalistic institutions. To consult with an expert through the CIJ, or to arrange a CIJ training session, contact the address on screen. This video is part of a series on the Tails operating system. If you haven't yet, make sure you watch our other videos on Tails. Click or tap on the pop-up message to access them. In the forthcoming steps, we're going to show you how to download Tails and install Tails using a Windows computer. This is the most common way to install Tails. If you don't have a Windows computer, check the Tails website for alternative methods. So let's get started. Open your browser. You can use any browser, but we recommend you use Tor browser to protect your anonymity while downloading Tails. To find out how to get Tor browser on Windows, click or tap on the pop-up message and choose our video Tor browser for Windows. Once you've started up your browser, go to tails.boum.org. This is the Tails website. You can read all about Tails on here. In particular, the Getting Started, Documentation, and Help and Support sections of the site are extremely useful. Click on the Install Tails button. This will load the Tails Installation Assistant. The Assistant is an extremely useful guide to getting Tails up and running on your setup. It asks you a series of questions to work out how best to create your own Tails media, and then gives you tailor-made instructions how to download and install Tails on your system. As we said before, we're going to show you how to download and install Tails on a Windows machine, since this is the most common method. But as you'll see, Tails Assistant offers you other methods. We recommend that you use it to find the way that best suits you. To start the Tails Assistant, you click on the Let's Start the Journey button. Now, we choose Windows. The first option here, Install from another Tails, only works if you already have a Tails USB. We're assuming that you're starting from scratch, so we need the second option, Install from Windows. The Assistant will now give you preparatory information about the whole process. Before you start, as the Assistant says, you'll need 2 USB drives. Both drives need to have at least 4 GB capacity. The process will completely erase all data on both USBs, so make sure they are either new USBs or, if you already have files on them, back all of them up before you start. One of these drives will become your Tails USB. The other USB drive will be used as an intermediary Tails USB, as a necessary step to creating the final one. Once you've finished the process, you won't need this USB anymore and can repurpose it for whatever you want. A brief note, some brands of USB work better than others. A note on the Tails website warns that some models of SanDisk USB stick won't work at all with Tails. To avoid disappointment, find the link in the description to read this page on the Tails website to make sure that the USBs you buy will work with Tails. It also takes about 2 hours to complete the whole process, so make sure you have adequate time before you begin. The Assistant also advises that you will need a second computer, smartphone or tablet in order to be able to follow the instructions. This is because, during the process, the computer you're using will have to be turned off and on again, so during these steps you will not be able to follow the instructions unless you have a different device. The same goes for this tutorial. If you're following the steps in this tutorial, you'll probably need to watch it on a separate computer to the one you're working on. The Assistant then gives you a brief overview of the different steps you will have to go through. First, you will download the Tails ISO, a big file that contains the Tails OS on it. Next, you will install that ISO onto one of your USBs, creating an intermediary Tails USB. This USB is not the final one. It lacks various security features. The final Tails USB must be created from within Tails. So, what you have to do is then restart your computer and boot from the intermediary Tails USB. Once you're within the intermediary tails, you can insert the other USB and install tails onto that, creating the final tails USB. You can now remove the intermediary tails. You can bin it or repurpose it if you like. You're finished with it. Now that the final tails USB is being created, we can restart again and boot into that. Once it's booted, you must now do some configuration, and once you're finished, you can restart a last time. You now have tails installed. So that's 1. Download tails, 2. Install tails onto the intermediary USB, 3. Restart and boot into intermediary tails, 4. Install tails onto the final USB, 5. Restart and boot into final tails, 6. Configure, 7. Restart, 8. Done. This might seem like a complicated process, but we guarantee that if you follow it step by step, it is very simple. To get going, click Let's Go. The first step is downloading tails. The assistant encourages not only to download, but to verify your download. Verifying your download is something you should get into the habit of doing. You see, when you download software, one of the risks is that an adversary could secretly intercept your connection to the website and swap the file you're downloading for a doctored version of the software. Without knowing, you'd be downloading a version of the software that has been altered so that it won't work properly or will compromise your system. The only way to guard against this is to verify the file after you've downloaded. Every file has a unique fingerprint, and it's possible to compare these fingerprints to make sure that the file you've downloaded is definitely the file that it's supposed to be. The assistant offers you a list of different ways you can verify your download. If you're using the Firefox browser, you can install an add-on which allows you to automatically verify the Tails download. This also works for Tor browser because Tor browser is based on Firefox. If you can't use this option, you could download the file using BitTorrent, which also automatically verifies the download. To use this option, you will need a BitTorrent client installed, such as Deluge or uTorrent. You can also download and verify using OpenPGP. This is a more complicated procedure which we're not going to cover here, but if you watch our OpenPGP tutorials, it will explain what this procedure is and how it is done. We're going to choose the first option, Install Firefox Add-on, so we will click on that. A pop-up appears asking you if you want to install the add-on. Choose Allow. Tor browser will then download the add-on from Mozilla's Firefox add-on repository, which means that the add-on itself is automatically verified. Another pop-up box will now ask if you want to install the add-on. Click Install, and Tor browser will install the add-on. A pop-up will now inform you that the plugin has been installed, and the page will refresh. You will now be presented with the button for the next step, Download Tails ISO image. Click this. A download box will now pop up asking you where you want to save the ISO. Save it to your Downloads folder. The button will now change into a progress meter, showing you the download progress. Wait while Tor browser downloads the Tails ISO. Once the download is complete, the verification will automatically take place. Assuming the verification checks out, you will get a green tick, and you will get a little box telling you the verification was successful. This means it's safe to proceed. Assistant will now show you instructions for the next stage of installing Tails, which is installing the intermediary Tails to a USB. We now need the first of the 2 USB drives you are going to use. Insert the USB drive into your computer. Make sure it is the only USB drive connected to your computer. You don't want to accidentally install Tails onto the wrong USB. To carry out this step, we need another piece of software called Universal USB Installer. This will use the Tails ISO we just downloaded to create a bootable Tails USB. Click on the link on screen to download Universal USB Installer. Choose to save the file to your Downloads folder. Wait while the file downloads. Once it's downloaded, navigate to your Downloads folder. Double-click on the Universal USB Installer download, and at the license agreement, click I agree. Once the software launches, you'll see this window. On step 1, click on this drop-down list, find Tails in the list, and click on it. On step 2, click on Browse, and in the pop-up window, navigate to the Downloads folder and find the Tails ISO we just downloaded. Select it and click Open. On step 3, click on the drop-down list. The USB you just inserted should be in the list. Exercise caution. The next step is going to erase everything on the USB you select, so you must make absolutely certain that you are selecting the correct USB. Once you've done so, tick the box FAT32 format drive erases content. Now you're ready to go. Assuming everything is correctly selected and you do want to proceed, click Create. A warning will now appear. To go ahead, click Yes. This will take a few minutes. Wait until it's finished. Once it's done, click Close to close Universal USB Installer. The USB drive in your computer has now been turned into an intermediary Tails. You will now be able to boot into Tails from this USB, and from there, create your final Tails USB. So, to begin the next stage, let's leave the USB in its port, and now shut down our computer. Now, booting from Tails can be a slightly tricky operation. So before we switch the computer back on, let's just talk a bit about how we get the computer to boot into Tails. Normally when your computer is turned on, it looks to the internal system drive, the drive on which Windows is installed, to find out what to do next. This is why your operating system boots automatically. But instead of booting from your system drive, we want to boot from the Tails USB we just made. So we have to tell your computer not to boot from its internal drive and to boot from the USB instead. This normally entails leaving the USB in the computer, turning the computer on, and then, during the first few moments after turning the computer on, pressing one of the F keys arrayed along the top of your keyboard. Pressing this key should bring up a boot menu, and you then select which attached drive you want to boot from. Or it enters a special BIOS settings menu where you change a couple of settings in order to alter the boot priority, that is, the place your computer will look first for something to boot from. So far so good, but unfortunately there is no standard key to press. Every brand and range of computer has a different key to press to get to the boot menu. For example, on Acer computers the key to press is Escape or F12 or F9. On Asus it's Escape or F8. On Dell, it's normally F12. On Lenovo, it could be F12 or F8, F10 or the Novo key. On Sony, it could be F11, Escape or F10, and so on. Because it's different from computer to computer, we can't give you instructions for booting from a USB for every individual computer in this tutorial. You have a number of options. Firstly, the Tails Installation Assistant has an excellent guide to some of the most common keys for the most common makes of computer. To get to it, on step 4 of 7 of the assistant, click on the troubleshooting link to expand a list of instructions for how to boot from USB. Another thing you could do is simply turn on your computer and each time try each of the F keys until you find one that works. This doesn't always work though, and you could end up changing important settings in your computer by accident. A last way is to find the brand and model of your computer and search the internet for that, along with the words boot from USB. Detailed instructions on how to carry out this procedure on your specific computer should be among the first results you get. Make note of these instructions. When you're ready to boot and you've found the specific instructions for your computer, make sure your intermediary Tails USB is still plugged into your computer, turn it on, and then use those instructions to bring up the boot menu. On our system, we can bring up the boot menu by pressing F12, so that's what we will do. If it works, you will see a boot menu like this. One of these entries will be your hard drive. There may be a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM option, and a network boot option if these apply to your system. But the one you are looking for is your USB. It will probably be listed under the make or manufacturer of your USB drive. With the arrow keys, choose that one and press Enter. And after a few seconds, if everything goes according to plan, you will be shown this screen. the Tails boot screen. If you don't see this screen, or if Windows begins to boot, you were unsuccessful and should try again. But if you do see this screen, press Enter to boot into Tails. Tails will now begin to boot. You may see some routine booting messages on the screen. This is normal. But most likely you will just see the Tails booting screen. And presently you should be shown the Tails greeter screen, which looks like this. We are going to fully explain the Tails greeter screen in a later tutorial. Right now we are interested in completing the installation of Tails, so just click through this screen by clicking on Start Tails. Wait a little longer and eventually you will see this screen. This is the Tails desktop. We are now using the intermediary Tails. The entire reason we have created this intermediary Tails is as a stepping stone to creating a final Tails, which has all of the Tails features enabled. This can only be done from within Tails, using a program built into Tails called the Tails installer. Let's do this now. First things first, take your other USB, the one that's going to become your final Tails. Plug it into your computer. Now we will open the Tails installer. To do so, click on the Applications menu at the top left-hand side of the screen. Find the Tails submenu, and within that, find Tails Installer. Click on it. After a few seconds, you will see the Tails Installer screen appear. The Tails Installer has a few different options, and we're going to fully explain all of them in a later tutorial. But for now, we just want to create our final Tails. So select the top option, Install by Cloning. Now you will be given another window, asking you to choose the USB you want to install Tails to. The only USB that should be plugged into your computer right now are the intermediary Tails, the one we just booted from, and the new USB that we want to install final Tails onto. If you have any other devices connected, make sure they are removed because you do not want to accidentally install Tails on the wrong device. Assuming you have no other devices connected, only one USB should appear in the drop-down list, the final Tails USB. Choose this one and then click Install Tails to start the installation. You will be given a confirmation window. Read the text carefully and then, if you are happy to proceed, click Yes. The installation will commence. It will take a few minutes. When it's finished, you will see this screen. It's now safe to close Tails Installer. We have now created the final Tails. It's time to restart and boot into final Tails. First, shut down the computer by clicking here and then selecting this icon. The computer should shut down, which looks a bit like this. Now, remove the intermediary Tails USB from your computer. You no longer need this USB. You can format it and use it for something else if you want. Leaving the new final Tails plugged into your computer, turn on your computer and use the same process you used before to boot from this Tails USB. The procedure should be exactly the same as before. And if everything has gone smoothly, you should eventually be shown the Tails greeter window again. Congratulations, you have now created a new, fully functioning Tails USB. You can carry this USB around with you as you wish and use it to access your secure Tails operating system. If you would like to use Tails now, you can select your language here and then click Start Tails. There may be one more thing you want to do before you start using Tails properly. Because we just created it, this Tails does not have persistence enabled. This means that Tails will forget everything you do as soon as you shut it down, and the next time you boot it up, it will be exactly as it was the first time you booted it up. Persistence allows you to keep some files from one session to the next. Our next video shows you how to enable and set up persistence on your new Tails USB. We also have a range of other videos explaining all aspects of Tails, what it is, and how to use all of its features. To watch these videos, click or tap on the pop-up message and choose the Tails video playlist. Thanks for watching Infosec Bytes. If you found this video useful, please share it widely with your colleagues and co-workers. To support the Center for Investigative Journalism with a donation, please visit tcij.org/donate. And if you would like to watch our other videos, please go to infosecbytes.org or subscribe to our channel below.